Jacob's working so hard. He's on his way. I promise. He's on his way.
Computers are awesome. I love them. I wasn't nervous at all, Jacob.
When they work, they're awesome.
When they work, right. When things
Were you
go
nervous?
awry.
You were nervous.
With all the information that I've got for you guys, it's overpowering.
It
Yes.
is, right.
You
Lots to
broke
go.
the computer.
Lots to talk
Anyways,
about.
let's see if this works here. We're talking about the tornado outbreak from September 14th. The Weather Service has released new details and upped the tornado count to 20. But looking at the details of that outbreak, there were a couple of tornadoes that were labeled as multi-vortex. The one near Arena, which was fortunately an EF unknown, meaning that it did not do any damage because the tornado, to get a rating 0 through 5, needs to do some damage. So fortunately that did not do any damage, but still was labeled multi-vortex. The one near Denhoff was rated EF2, damage at multiple properties, and again was multi-vortex. And then a tornado southeast of Kiev that was EFU was also labeled multi-vortex. So what does that mean? Well, a multi-vortex tornado is characterized by several smaller intense vortices. They're also referred to as subvortices or suction vortices that rotate around, inside, and as part of the main tornado. This was discovered all the way back in the 70s by Ted Fujita, Mr. Tornado, who the EF scale is named after. And this was his sketch showing those suction vortices within the larger tornado rotation itself. So those multiple vortices rotate around and can leave kind of a damage path like that. This is an image of one just forming way back in the 1950s in Dallas. But here's that cycloid pattern that you can see left behind in a field from a multi-vortex tornado. Those suction vortices that rotate around the main tornado can cause damage in those kind of looping paths. So another example of the scouring of a field in Wisconsin from a multi-vortex EF3 tornado, the one intense suction vortice was right there in the middle, but then the circular pattern of the winds can be seen in the larger tornado path. So most tornadoes remain as a narrow column of rotating, rising air, but if there's a process called a vortex breakdown, where you have sinking air within the center of that tornado, that can allow for downdraft and the tornado to expand in size and create those separate suction vortices. Some of them can be very powerful. Now, the tornado doesn't have to be very large in order to have multiple suction vortices. This was a really great video sent in by Jordan of that tornado south and west of Arena on September 14th, looking from southwest of Tuttle, and you can see how it was pretty large for our standards here in North Dakota, but you can't necessarily pick out those individual suction vortices because there's dust and debris being lofted. But researchers can visualize this with really powerful supercomputers. This simulation is of a multi-vortex EF5 tornado, and look at all of that rotation being sucked up into the storm, being concentrated and stretched. And that's the main suction vortice, the main most powerful part of the tornado, but there's other looping and twisting areas of air that are being spun around that main vortex, being sucked up into the parent storm itself. And those suction vortices, the multi-vortex nature, kind of dance around that main intense center of the tornado. And as it eventually weakens, it gets a little messier, and the tornado can undergo a process called roping out, where the center of the tornado, the main tornado itself, gets skinnier before eventually going up into the clouds. That research was done by Lee Orff at the University of Wisconsin. Really fascinating there. A real-world visual that is somewhat similar to what you just saw there with that computer visualization happened back in June in the South Hart area. This is the kind of tornado genesis formation process where you can kind of see those stretched, rotating columns of air coming up into the cloud and forming that EF1 tornado that was near the South Hart Dickinson area back on June 19th. And you can usually see those multiple vortices as the tornado is initially forming. This is what that tornado turned into on June 19th. I don't have confirmation that it was a multiple vortex tornado, but it was pretty large for our standards here in North Dakota. Another interesting fact about the tornadoes that happened on September 14th was that there was a couple labeled as satellite tornadoes, and those were around the Denhoff area. So this is a map of the approximate paths of some of the tornadoes in Sheridan and McLean counties. The main Denhoff tornado was 13 miles long and rated EF2. And that was on the ground from south of Denhoff to just west of the town and then to the northwest of Denhoff. But before that EF2 tornado formed, there was a reported intermittent rope tornado that was rated EFU because it did not do any damage, and then one that formed just to the northeast of the main path of the EF2 tornado, labeled a satellite tornado. So there's smaller twisters that form alongside the much larger dominant tornadoes. They often orbit around that main tornado or can be absorbed by it, but it's part of the same parent supercell. They form when those strong low-level wind interactions happen, creating smaller scale vortices, similar to what we've seen with some of those other animations. They get stretched and intensified by the storm's dynamics, but unlike the multiple vortex tornadoes, where those smaller vortices are inside the main tornado itself, these satellite tornadoes develop outside the main tornado circulation and have their own rotation. And those Denhoff satellite tornadoes were on the ground at the same time as that main EF2 tornado was. So thankful that there were no injuries or fatalities from that historic September outbreak, but really fascinating and unique to have these multiple vortex and satellite tornado situations in North Dakota.
It's more of an Oklahoma, Texas thing, right? So
Yeah.
this has been a weird year anyway with 80 tornadoes,
Yeah.
20 from the 14th. That's it. Let's
We
hope.
don't want to
We're
do
done.
that again.
Let's hope
All
we're
right.
done. That's right,
Thanks,
Jacob.
Jacob.
Thank you.
You're welcome.